I'm Professor Sarabjit Kaur. I'm at Jagat Guru Nanak Dev Punjab State Open University, Patiala. I am going to deliver a lecture on the theme Social Contract Theory, a theory which is going to explain the origin of the state. Now, before getting into this particular theory, let me briefly tell you something about what the state is. State, the word state coming from the Latin word status, which basically means the status of a particular thing. Now, how do we understand what is state? Now, when we talk about state, it is very important that we have to focus on four very important elements. What are they? Population, territory, government and sovereignty. These are four essential elements, and if any one of these elements is missing, we really cannot talk about the state. So, in fact, we have a very good definition given of state by Garner. He defines state in terms of these four elements. So, the existence of these four elements are very important for the state to exist. Like for example, during the British time, we had a government, we had population, we had territory, but what was missing was sovereignty. And because there was no sovereignty, we really could not talk about India as a state. When did India become a state? When we got independence in 1947. After understanding the idea of the state, it becomes important to understand theories which talk about the origin of the state. Now, if we look into the theories, there are many theories regarding the origin of the state. Matriarchal, patriarchal, divine right theory. Now, of the various theories which explain the origin of the state, one important theory which I am going to explain is the social contract theory. This is a very important theory which explains why state as an institution originated. Now, before we understand this theory, it becomes essential to know what was the background of this theory. This is a time when scientific revolution is taking place, industrial development is taking place, and all this is impacting the writings of the scholars of that particular time. Now, what is this social contract theory? Social means dealing with society, contract is agreement. So, as per this theory, state is an outcome of an agreement. And who signs the agreement? The society, the people in the society. So, unlike the divine right theory, which talks about state as a representative of God on earth, this theory says that it is an artificial institution created by the people for their well-being. This theory was supported by important scholars like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In order to understand this particular theory, we should keep in mind three very important themes. What are they? First is state of nature. Then is social contract. And the third important theme is nature of state. To begin with, Hobbes. He has written a very important work, Leviathan. And if you look into this particular work of Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, you will see that the cover of the book really reflects this particular theory. You will find a big giant, and within the body of the big giant are small figures. This book, which he wrote way back in 1651, in this particular book, he expresses his theory. What is this theory? So to begin with the first important theme, that is the state of nature. That is, what was the position of the society before the coming of the state? And he says that the life of man in the state of nature, to quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. There was a constant desire to gain more and more power. And in the desire to gain more and more power, people went to the extent of killing another person. So, there was a constant fear of death in the state of nature. So, in order to overcome this particular situation, people agreed to enter into a contract. This was a contract which was signed by the people, and the interesting thing about this contract is that people sign this contract and the person to whom they are surrendering their powers is not a party to the contract. So the ruler is not a party, but he is given total powers by the people. So if we talk about the nature of the state, as far as Hobbes was concerned, he was the supporter of absolute monarchy. And in fact, the most interesting thing is that we need to understand the time period to which Hobbes is belonging. He is a person who is associated with the royal family of England. He was a tutor, and this is the time when people are demanding more powers, wanted to reduce the power of the monarch. But as far as Locke was concerned, he was the supporter of absolute monarchy. So this is the theory which is propounded by Thomas Hobbes. Then we have the next important thinker. He is also an English scholar, but he is again writing at a time when there is a glorious revolution taking place in England. But unlike Hobbes, who supports absolute monarchy, Locke is a supporter of a limited government. And if we compare the views of Locke with Hobbes, unlike Hobbes, who has given a pessimistic view regarding the state of nature, Hobbes gives an optimistic view. He says that the life of man in the state of nature is peaceful, it is good, and people are even enjoying certain natural rights. And he talks about 3 important natural rights. What are they? Right to life, right to liberty, and right to property. Then the question comes in our mind that if he is giving such an optimistic view of the society or the state of nature, then why do we need the state? But then he points out that there are certain inconveniences. For example, if some judgment is given, who will pursue that judgment? Who will get it implemented? That force, that power that was missing. And because of this, he talks about a social contract. Now the interesting thing, again, unlike Hobbes, who talks about a single contract, Hobbes talks about a double stage contract. A contract first the people sign, and after that a government is made. And unlike again Hobbes, who makes people surrender all their powers, Locke says that people will enter into the contract, but they will not surrender all their powers. They will retain their natural rights. And what are the natural rights? The right to life, liberty and property. So, the government is like a trust. It will function and it will be respected by the people till it functions properly. Now, what is the form of government which John Locke supports, and which we find like the detailed theory discussed in his work, two treatises on civil government? The form of government he supports is a limited government, a government of limited constitutional government, a government where people are given, unlike Hobbes, the right to revolt in case they find that the government is not in a position to perform its functions properly. They can revolt. The last but not the least, the important thinker associated with the social contract theory is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He is a French scholar, written important work, The Social Contract. And when we focus on the three themes, that is the state of nature, the social contract and the nature of state, we find his views different from the two scholars. As far as the state of nature is concerned, he says that man in the state of nature was leading a very good life. Man was a simple person, simple creature. He was so simple, even he had not developed his techniques of communication. He could not understand even the forces of nature. He was totally dependent on nature. He says that in the state of nature, the life of man was that of a noble savage. Then, how did the state come if people were leading a good life? He says that as development starts taking place in the society, people start leading from nomadic, they start getting settled in a particular area, they started encroaching land, and the first man, he says, who encroached the land and said this is mine was a person who started all the problems in society. So the feeling of mine and thine was the main reason for giving emergence to this state. So in order to overcome the insecurity of life, he talks about a social contract. Now, what is this social contract? He says that people will not surrender to any one individual. People will surrender to themselves the powers. So, he talks about a very important concept which is known as the concept of general will. It's a will of the people. In fact, when he talks about the will, he divides the general will into two important categories. One is the real will and other is the actual will. The actual will basically reflects the selfish interest of the people, but the real will is the pure will where no selfish interest is reflected. So he says in his work that if people surrender themselves to the society, it will be for their good. So this concept of general will for him is very, very important. That will bring a kind of a order in the society. In fact, the popular sovereignty which we talk of today, the roots of it goes to Rousseau. So these are three important thinkers who have reflected their opinion regarding this particular theory, that is a social contract theory. Now we all know that no theory is a perfect theory. Every theory has some deficiencies. So this theory is also not free of criticisms. There are critics who say it is a bad history, bad logic, bad philosophy. Bad history, why? Because this particular theory has no historical evidence. We cannot trace that a particular period, that during this particular period of time people lived this kind of a life. So there is no historical basis. Further, if we study from the logic point of view, it again can be criticized. Why? Because you cannot Like you have to first create a state and then enter into an agreement. You can't first enter into an agreement and then create the state. First there should be some authority which will be backing an agreement. So logically also this theory has been criticized. Philosophically too, there are criticisms that you cannot force the future generations to accept this theory. So this theory has certainly some criticisms, but in spite of these criticisms, this theory has been very, very important, because the views expressed by the scholars of this theory has been a source of inspiration for many countries. For example, John Locke's views has influenced the American Constitution. They have incorporated the natural rights. Further, like Rousseau's views were very, very important. It was a source of inspiration for the French Revolution, which took place in 1789. So with this, basically, I have provided you an insight into the social contract theory. Thank you.